Thank you for listening to this new episode of the Business of Fun podcast. I am your host, Dave Wakeman. I want to wish you Happy New Year, the first episode of 2026. My guest today from Quantizr is Josh Litwack. This is a great conversation and one I held so you could specifically get it as the first episode you heard this year. Josh and I had a great conversation about what's up at Quantizr. We talked about his ambition to put the tools and power of just a regular old business in the hands of touring musicians. We talked about goal setting. We talked about his favorite band. We talked about the hype of AI and how that compares to the hype of the internet. We talked about what the reality of AI is. We talked about intentionality and purpose. We talked about change. We talked about entrepreneurship. We talked about all kinds of really great stuff. This is an awesome conversation. I think you're going to dig it. Before I turn it over to my talk with Josh, I want to remind you to check out the Talking Tickets newsletter at talkingtickets.substack.com and my website, davewakeman.com. Lots of stuff coming up in 2026. But let's get you right here, right now, to my conversation with Josh Litwack on the Business of Fun. All right, I want to welcome Josh Litwack from Quantizr to the Business of Fun podcast. Josh, what's up, man?
What's up, bro? Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, this is great. I believe we're going to give a shout out to Randy Nichols, who connected us when I was looking for some new podcast guests. So this is great because you were saying some really nice things about me before, but you're like a really nice guy as well, and like have such like great energy that I can't wait for people to hear from you. Now, I'm going to surprise you. Yeah, of course, man. I am going to surprise you, though, and this is like the only time I'm going to do a got you ever on this podcast, because when we first talked about setting the podcast up, you mentioned that kind of where you got started on the idea for Quantizr was you went to see your favorite band 106 times, and I specifically did not ask you who your favorite band was because I wanted to save it for the podcast. So who is your favorite band, and how many times have you seen them now?
My favorite band by a long shot is Phish. I have an incredible community surrounding Phish. I am at 106 shows, but I am going to 4 more over New Year's. So God willing, I'll be at 110. And I also got my Sphere tickets for next year as well. So, that show count, I'll tell you, my wife has this, really great line that I really love. Someone asked her how she's been to 76 Phish shows. And she said, well, you go to a couple 4-night runs a year, it adds up. And, I think that really sums up it up really well. You end up going to 106 shows where you do a couple 4-night runs a year for, a long time. And I just hope they keep playing forever. I hope that, everyone can stay healthy. And, I think that, more than, I'm a huge data guy, and we'll obviously get into this. And, data obviously, motivates me in a lot of different ways. But one of the things I love most about my show count is earlier this year, we celebrated my 100th show. And we had about 50 friends fly in from all over the country, and I guess internationally as well, because I'm from Canada, to celebrate with me. And, when you really think about, life, what really is more meaningful than having 50 friends from all over come and celebrate an obscure milestone of seeing the same band 100 times? And what I've learned in life is sometimes the things that are most enjoyable might be the most unconventional. And I've known to be an unconventional guy, and I think my show count really calls that out. So nice curveball. But I'd be happy to spend this whole time talking about Phish if you'd like, because I got content on Phish. Because again, as one of my mentors says, it's easy to say nice things when you mean it.
Yeah, well, this is the biggest got you in the history of the Business of Fun. Is like I held that back, and I was like, "Going, I bet you it's Phish," but I didn't want to assume. But I do the same thing as like you were saying with your friends and having them all come in to celebrate your 100th Phish show.
I take friends like all over the place to see Pearl Jam. Like I'll meet up people. So I've been only probably been to 25 shows. Well, only 25. But like there's people who tell me like going, I remember when you took me to that Pearl Jam show, or like I'll meet people and it's just like this great community around music. And it's possible I will be going to one of those four shows at the Garden that you're talking about at the end of the year, because I've always wanted to go see Fish and I've never had the opportunity.
Well, I'll tell you, man. There's certainly something special about seeing a Fish show with myself and my wife Lital. We've gotten a lot of people into the band over the years, and I think you said it great, right? Like there's so much community surrounding music, right? And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people ask me like, how do you see 4 nights in a row of the same band? And the thing to really understand about Fish is they play a different show every single night, right?
Right.
That's
Yep.
one of the reasons why the data is so much fun to watch, right? Because if you go 4 nights, they don't repeat a song once in those 4 nights. It's pretty incredible to think of over, the last 15 years, the shows that I've seen, the data that's accumulated.
Mm-hmm.
And again, as a data focused guy and everything else in my life, I feel very fortunate to have the data I have behind my fandom, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I have that Pearl Jam app too, and it tells me which songs I'm seeing. I mean, so,
There you go.
yeah. Oh, I mean, come on. This is crazy
That's what
stuff.
it's all about, man. It's fun. It's fun.
Yeah.
It's such a good kickoff for our podcast today, right? Because I think some people might that aren't data oriented might think that this like takes away from the fun, right? Like people ask me all the time of like, hey, like does all the data really like cloud your mind? Is it really all that fun? And I'll tell you, at my 100th show, the biggest compliment I got from a lot of my friends who have seen even more Fish than me have said, man, I really wish I tracked my data early on. And that's the whole thing, right? I've been a data guy my whole career. I was at Bloomberg and BlackRock, and really have done a lot surrounding data professionally. But I very firmly believe that you need to put the same rigor into your personal life that you put into your professional life. And so just the same as I track all my Fish stats, I track all my ski days. I have my own proprietary metrics of how I define a good ski day, and I have all the data on that as well. And so, for me, I'm big on goal setting. I'm big on taking the same rigor on my personal life as I do in my professional life. And so I think I was really destined to be on the Business of Fun podcast is really what this is all saying.
I believe it's true.
And
And
shout
it's
out to
funny.
Randy Nichols for being the best guy ever. And really anything Randy tells me to do, I'm always down to do. Let's just call that for what it is. I love him. He's an advisor to us. He's a personal close friend. And, when he introduced us, it was a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, he's a good dude. I don't think nearly enough people know him there, but there's a lot of people who know of him, and but to know him is like to have an entirely different appreciation of him.
Yeah, and Randy, I would say, is one of the guys that's probably had one of the most impact, on this industry, of many people that I know. So, listen, as much as I could say about Fish, I could say about Randy. We could spend this whole time talking about Fish and Randy, probably two of my favorite topics.
Right. Well, what Andy does, and this leads us into the conversation we're going to have, is Andy. Oh, they're all of them. He innovates, right, and he's always looking for new ideas and new ways to help artists and managers and people in the industry make the business sustainable. And the thing I like about what we talked about before this conversation, in our first conversation, was you kind of laid out a couple metrics for me about what where the idea came from and kind of what you're driven to do. One of them was financial literacy. The other one was about AI safety, and then educating people was the last part. And I thought those were all cool because I was like, the financial literacy thing. You said you grew up, I believe, maybe like lower middle class in Canada, and then I was saying how I grew up at the end of a dirt road, and I was the first person in my family that always had indoor plumbing. And that financial literacy thing is super important. Interesting thing you mentioned to me when we were preparing to start recording today was talking about how the business of concerts and live entertainment can still feel a little behind the times, and that there's a sort of stigma around focusing on financial literacy when it comes to running your business. I think a specific example you gave was about or tours and bands and people starting out on tour and already being in the hole because they don't know that they're going to lose money at the start of a tour. And you're just giving, and Quantizr at the heart is like a tool that brings people just to parity with other industries. So the question really is did I do a good job of describing what you do? And if so, if not, what did I miss?
No, I think that's a great I think that's a great description. If you want to come sell for us, there's definitely a career path there for you. We can talk about that one
I'm a
offline.
great salesman.
You're a great salesman, great salesman, and you're 100% right. I mean, at the core of it, the economics of touring have become significantly more challenging, right? Everything costs more than it used to. We can go through every line item, but at the end of the day, in a world where everything costs more and touring economics becoming more and more challenging, it's really, really, really important to save every dollar and make every dollar where you can and make sure that it counts, right? And ultimately, when you think about it, right, the amount of artists that go on tour only to find out that they lost money after the tour is really truly a preposterous thing. And that's not to say that losing money for a period of time is not acceptable. Obviously, every company, every band, every entity, goes through that period. But the goal is how do you really help them be aware? How do you help them make better financial decisions? How do you help them get the data that's needed to make those financial decisions? And that's ultimately the core of financial literacy. My view is that everybody has the right to be able to truly understand what affects their financial situation. And I think one of the issues in entertainment historically is twofold. One is that historically it's been very taboo to talk about financials in the entertainment industry. Oh, we're doing it for the arts and whatever. And you see less and less of that happening today, right? More people are interested in being able to learn more. They just don't have the tools to do that. And that's really where Quantizr comes in for the latter part of this, right? Is we created this tool to be able to enable the manager, the business manager, and the agent who are collectively representing the artist and helping them win, really take control of the data and ultimately help them make the best decisions that ultimately help the artist win. And there's a lot of different types of data. There's a lot of different ways to help artists win. And the angle that we took is the financial side, right? Really being able to extract the data from a lot of different documents. And we live through in a really, really incredible time in human history where AI is really one of the biggest opportunities that we have as a society, but it's also a threat if it's not being used correctly. And I think you said that really, really well in terms of AI safety. A couple of years ago, people would be like, we're never going to use AI, it's evil. And now you're seeing agents and managers and business managers throwing contracts into ChatGPT, letting them train the model on their data. And it's just dangerous. A lot of people just aren't aware that there are tools like Quantizr that allow you to safely leverage this data within a controlled environment and in a standardized way to be able to compare time periods, to be able to compare across artists. And the third part that you said is this technology exists in every other industry. For me, I grew within financial services. I watched data and analytics ultimately change the way that everyone in financial services does this. And my hope for the world is that not that everyone's going to make money, not that every tour is going to make money, but at least before you go on tour, have an idea of what do you think's going to happen? Because in my mind, goal setting and holding yourself accountable is one of the core principles in 2025 that really leads to purpose and understanding and really helping people make better decisions on the whole.
Yeah. The cool thing that I find about all of those stuff you brought up was that there has been this huge taboo, and you still run into it. Less so in concerts, and definitely almost never in sports, but a lot of times in like the theater, where it's like, oh, we're artists. But the thing about it is, and this has been my point of view, is like just because you're an artist doesn't mean you don't deserve to get paid, because you are still creating value. You're still providing an experience to people. And if you
I would argue that they're adding the most value, right? In 2025, what are the things that are truly uniquely human? I personally feel that live entertainment is one of the most important industries for the future of humanity. And I know that's a bold statement, but the reason is I think of the community that I have around music. I think of the feeling and the flow state that I get to listening to music. I think of all of these different things. It's just good for humanity to
Yeah.
be able to have these live experiences. And if we don't take care of our artists, if we don't help them really understand their business, they don't have to be the most financially literate person in the world. But my goal is that ultimately everyone can at least have a baseline understanding of how they're doing so that they can make good decisions and ultimately be happy and fulfilled in their life.
Yeah. I don't find the idea absurd at all that like an artist should have a base level of financial literacy. I mean, if you in your bold statement about this being like the future of humanity, I don't think that's wrong either, because some of our great art is passed down from generation to generation to generation. People still talk about the great composers like Chopin or the great authors like Shakespeare, right? These things have held people together for generation after generation after generation. And in the world we live in today, that human connection is more important than ever, which to me, and this, I guess this probably shows why I'm a good salesman, or either I don't want to run into the infomercial part of this, but this is what made talking to you about Quantizr interesting, because I know that, because I grew up in South Florida, which, around artists. I lived in Seattle around musicians. I lived in New York City around artists and musicians. I live in DC. There are not as many artists and musicians here. But the thing is like to make the career sustainable for people. And that's like the whole litany of ideas that you brought together, which is, financial literacy, understanding how to use tools, and just knowing your numbers. Because if not, you put yourself at the whim of the market. And right now, what we have is an environment where artists are getting squeezed at every touch point, right? And that's one of the big things about knowing the numbers. But what I wanted to touch on before we get too deep in here is like you talked about. You gave me a shout out for saying AI safety, and you talked about there's a threat and a tool. And I think it's important for people to understand the difference between the two, because a lot of times we hear there's a lot of hype. I guess the easiest way to say it is there's a lot of hype around AI. I spent some time in the last week or so understanding AI better, understanding the business model of AI, understanding kind of the foundational things. I think it's probably overhyped a little bit. I think that, like you pointed out, the context is important. And just like with any tool, there's good and bad things. But I want you to help people understand why something like AI, especially with like something like Quantizr, is a valuable tool and it's not something that's going to steal their art. Because I think that's a valid concern.
100%. Well, let's first talk about the AI hype, because I think that's a really important topic that's gaining a lot more attention recently, and I think we should talk about that, and then we'll go into the safety, right? Is there a lot of hype about AI today? Obviously, you can't, look anywhere without someone talking about AI, right? And a lot of people, say to us all the time, like, oh, like, is it just a bubble? Is it just a bubble, right? The way I like to look at it is think about the internet, right? When the internet came in and when the internet came out, right, there was a lot of hype around the internet, right? Mm-hmm. Was it a bubble? Yeah. And then the bubble burst, but you're still using the internet every single day of your life, and it becomes part of how you do life, right? And so I think the most important thing about AI today that I would say from a safety perspective is to recognize, yes, there's a lot of hype, but it's important to really be aware of what are the things that are ultimately going to impact your day-to-day life that AI can influence. And I'll give you an example. I'm faculty at the University of Utah in their Master of Business Creation program. Every student in the program is the founder of a business, and they're learning how to operate their business more effectively while in the program. I absolutely love collaborating with the entrepreneurs and helping them grow. And it's interesting because one of the things I found just being faculty and have a lot of people coming to me saying, hey, if I have a student or I have a son, daughter that's going into the workforce today, what would you tell them to do? And I think about this a lot. And I would say any industry you're interested in getting involved in, learn about the technology that's affecting that industry, right? So like if you're in the entertainment industry, obviously you should look at Quantizr. If you're involved in other industries, look at the technology that's doing it. Because what's really important is AI is not going to save the world or ruin the world. It's the specialized use cases of AI that are going to have that effect on your life, right? So now let's get into the safety side of this thing, right? So from a safety perspective, one of the things that I find really challenging is people really have a hard time, especially in the entertainment industry, differentiating music production AI tools, right, and business analytical tools, right? Two are very different, right? Obviously, you see AI being able to produce songs at the fastest rate ever. You're seeing those garner a lot of attention. And that unquestionably is changing the way people make music. We'd be wrong to say that it isn't, right? The other side of this is really the business side, right? And as we talked about earlier, a lot of the business side has been neglected for many, many, many years. People almost didn't want to like even think that the entertainment industry was a real business. It's, oh, we're in it for the art, right? And my core belief is that if we can enable as a society the boring business stuff to be taken care of via AI, it creates the opportunity for us all to be a lot more creative, and not just the artists, right? The manager has more time to really think about how to help the artist win. The agent can evaluate deals in more effective ways and eke out a couple extra dollars to make sure that the tour makes more money, right? The business manager doesn't have to be reconciling things for days trying to figure out if the tour made money, right? The reality is I could go on a list of all the things that we can do with the time that we would save with using AI. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's not useful to you, right? As I was saying earlier. And now from a safety perspective, right? The other part of safety is a lot of people don't really understand what AI really is, right? One of the things that's really challenging for me is people think the free tools are free, right? They're not, right? When you take something and you put it into ChatGPT, there isn't legislation around, like you see a lot of people using ChatGPT as their therapist right now, right? This frightened me for a lot of different ways. One, obviously there's a loneliness epidemic, which for the record, that's one of the reasons why I think live performance and, things that are uniquely human are so important. So again, this is certainly a vicious cycle. But the other part of this, when you're really thinking about this from a safety perspective, is there is not the legislation when someone's using ChatGPT as their therapist. These things could potentially be subpoenaed. We don't necessarily know the end results. And so what's really important is when you put your data into a system, you got to know where that data is going. You got to understand where it is and what it's doing. I mean, I've had friends tell me that they're putting a lot of confidential information into these things about their kids, about this, about that. And that scares the bejesus out of me. Because again, just because it's free doesn't mean it's free, right? And so really a big value prop of what we're doing with Quantizr is really figuring out safe ways to be able to take the unstructured data that you have in all of these agreements, structure that data, own that data, and then ultimately make better decisions with that information. And again, I see, a lot of agents and managers creating these little like chat bots on the side, but they don't necessarily know where these things are. And, one of the things that I try to do as an advocate for AI is really help people to understand, this technology is here to stay. It's going to be embedded in all of the different workflows that you have, and how humans interact in the future is going to be fundamentally different. Two, there are safe ways to use AI. And as the industry changes, it's really, really important to stay on top of that. And three is we don't all need to recreate the wheel here, right? One of the biggest things that's important with AI is these large language models have a lot of good general information, but the specialized knowledge is always going to come from the industry. I always think about it at, one of my friends runs a creative agency. He told me something really fascinating. He said, AI is going to raise the floor of what the quality of creative work is, but humans will raise the ceiling using AI of what we have the ability to do. And I think that that's something that's really, really important to recognize in 2025, is that as a human, being able to leverage this technology allows you to be better at what you do on a day-to-day basis. And as it relates to Quantizr, I always find it funny, right? You think of like an agent's or an assistant's job as an agency manually inputting data into a system, right? I can tell you there's probably a better use of that person's time and energy than manually doing that, right? And I think we can all agree that in the future, that won't be the way people do it. And so, for me as a technologist, I'm always thinking about how can we make humans better? How can we do it safely? And how can we drive better end results for everybody in every part of the ecosystem? And, that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about what we're doing.
Yeah, I think you explained it pretty well because one thing about the AI hype that
do you use the internet?
I do use the internet. So this is
we're on the internet right now.
It's true. Also, awesome Tim Hortons cup. But somebody found me, like people are using AI as a search engine, and somebody found me yesterday through Chat GPT because they were looking for somebody who knew about pricing tickets for sports for games. So I'm not a Luddite was the long way around this. And what I do is when I do make these like proclamations that can seem kind of like on, I think technology is bad, or I think like, this is all overblown. It's mainly because I'm trying to enforce one idea on people, which is like the context and the application of how you use the tool matters more than what the tool is. Because
well said.
AI, I like it. I use it constantly for, especially for like idea creation and curating things, because there's a lot of stuff that's wrong. But kind of understanding where AI makes its mistakes helps me come up with new ideas. But I never just turn over my whole business to it. And I think that where people get lost is they think, oh my God, somebody said, oh, it's going to steal half the jobs. It probably is not going to steal half the jobs because you're still going to need people that do certain things. What it probably will do, though, is like cut out the tedious and give you more room for the creative and the human. And I think that's what's cool about applying a tool like Quantizr, because I mean you're the CEO of Quantizr, and we're talking about this idea. So plugging away for you. This is more plugs than most people get. This is great. But what's cool about it is it allows people who have a little bit of reluctance because they're in it for the art, man, right? To take away some of that tedious stuff, man. Those settlement meetings are awful sometimes. Some of this like just sort of routing a tour can be somewhat tedious, right? And you kind of look at data or look at the map a certain number of ways. AI can help accelerate some of these things. It allows you to be, like you said, it raises the floor, but it allows you to do those human things much better.
Yeah, and it allows you to focus on what your core business is, right? Like that's one of the things I think that's really important, right? It's not about the manual data entry or anything like that, but like, is your firm defined by how well you input data into a system? No, of course not. Your firm is defined by a lot of other variables. And I think that what AI gives us all the opportunity to do is focus on our core business. Yeah. But I think you've said it really well, right? Like AI is going to change the way people work, right? It already has, right? And I think that that kind of is exactly why I give the advice to get to know the technology in the industry. It's why I get so involved in education, is that like I just fundamentally believe that in 2025, getting to know this technology, you get ahead of what the industry is going to be doing, and then you can evolve with it, right? We constantly, as humans, all have to reinvent ourselves, right? That's kind of what it is to be a human in 2025. And so hopefully, as you said, AI can help you with idea generation, but at the same time, I think there's also an over-reliance on AI, right? You got some people that can't write an email without putting an AI in. I despise the M- more than anyone, right? Like when I get like an email from someone that's so clearly written by AI, I don't even open it, right? Like I think there's a lot about like the human nature that's really important. And like, if anyone's received an email from me, I'm a very authentic guy and, to the point. But I think that like, it's important to find where it helps you and where it hurts you. And unless you really love manually inputting data into systems and looking for where the problems are in an Excel spreadsheet because there's one cell that's off, changing how much money everybody's making, I think there's a better way.
Yeah. Well, so on the email thing, people can tell it's definitely coming from me because I overuse the ellipse. So
Yeah.
there's no chat GPT that's going to
You do use that a lot.
it.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's interesting. That's your
But at
that's your
least you
thing,
know it's me.
But
So
it's human. Everyone's got their human thing that they do,
yeah.
right? And I think that's the other thing too. Just because I'm an advocate of AI, I'm also a big advocate of human innovation and intellectual stimulation, right? Like at the end of the day, like, I love being a part of all the communities that I'm a part of. I think AI can do a lot of stuff. And, fundamentally, like, we, as a company really think about how can we make humans better, right? Like that really, and I hope more of my, peers that are, executives at, AI companies, are thinking the same thing. Now, again, as many of my friends tell me regularly, they aren't. But that's another one of the things that really makes us unique, right? In terms of like our approach. So that's, I think that's something special.
Well, what you said about this whole thing is interesting to me was like it allows people to focus on their core business and the kind of the core skills that they have. And I find that
and
one
every
of the
business
things
is questioning their core business in 2025 too, right? Like that's another big theme today.
Oh, it's 100% a theme. We're recording this on December 12th, and I think it'll go live. I think you're going to be the first episode of 2026. So,
starting the year strong.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that way we timestamp this. But I've spent the last 2 weeks. I said I was studying AI, but just rethinking how I create value for the people I work with and for the people I serve. So yes, like understanding your business and understanding the core value of what you do is incredibly important. And one of the things though I find, maybe that drives reluctance to use tools in the concert business or in the arts or sports, whatever, is that people don't necessarily have a complete grasp on what their core identity is, or the core value they drive is. When you're having these conversations with people about using tools to just improve themselves, because at the base is like we're allowing people to be more human and do more human things. How do you overcome that objection if you find it, or if you find that is like a big challenge that you have to overcome?
I mean, it's all about intentionality and purpose, right? And that's both personal and professional. As I was saying, I put the same rigor to my personal life that I do my professional life. I'm known as like the goal setting guy among all my friends. And the reason why I'm so obsessed with goal setting is that it enables you to be able to be intentional about what you want, right? And a lot of the times, a lot of these things are a function of people really struggling with their intentionality, right? It's so easy to get distracted in today's day and age. It's so easy to say that this is, you could spend your whole day scrolling and thinking that you're being productive, right? But the reality is that in 2025, as we start 2026, I would think that this will continue and be a trend into 2026 and beyond.
Shout out to 2026.
Shout out to 2026. But like as we think about what the future holds, I think it's more and more important for us to all be intentional, right? Like, where are we putting our time? Are we being as effective as we want, right? Like on the personal side, right? But then on the business side, like what is our core business? What's tertiary? What opportunities do we have, right? And so I think that what AI really gives you the opportunity to do, right, is be more strategic and think about it. But again, nothing is going to replace human innovation in the way that we're thinking about it today.
Yeah, and that the being strategic, that is like the core skill that I have, which is, and the big idea that drives it is that like everybody needs a strategy because everybody needs to know where they're going. And that's really all that strategy does is like helps you know where you're going. So when you talk about being the goal setting guy, that's interesting to me because I know people a lot of people say they're goal setters or they're like type A and driven. And what I find interesting about that though is like they're not you, because you're not you use strategy in these things. Other people though, they really just use this as an excuse to run around with like a chicken with their head cut off, and I think then what they do is they allow the goals to be shackles, right? Like I set this goal, I can't stop. Um, can you talk a little bit about like setting the right goals and or being willing to walk away from the goals? Because again, when we're working with tools and we're trying to improve our business to be more human, knowing your numbers, knowing your goals is super important. But then also knowing like you're not tracking something because it was always the way we did things is equally as important.
100%. So I have a very regimented goal exercise that I do every year. And the purpose for doing so is to really reevaluate these goals on a constant basis. I even set weekly goals, really to make sure that I'm holding myself to what I say that I'm going to do. Now, one of the really important parts of this, though, that I think you're kind of touching on is that your goals are going to change, right? And so what's really important is really recognizing, when your goals should change and when they should stay the same, right? For me, I've been doing this goal setting exercise for about 20 years. And one of my favorite things to do is to look back to 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 10 years ago, what I thought my long-term goals were. And I just laugh, right? Because, some things impress you for the positive. Like, so for example, I wasn't expecting to sell a software business at the age of 35 and move to the mountains, right? I always thought that I wanted to move to the mountains when I retired at 65. And there's a few things that changed. One, I don't ever want to retire. I've taken 2 of the last 6 years off, and I did a trip around the world with my wife for 1 year when I left the corporate world. And after I sold my business, I took a year off to ski. And what I've learned is after a year, I get bored. I want to work. I like working. I like being involved in things. I'm a busy guy. I like being busy. I like being a mover and a shaker, right? And secondarily, I moved to the mountains when I was 35, not 65, right? So it kind of changes a lot of the things along. And then you have to kind of reevaluate your goals. You have to really think about like, what do I want? What do I need? And then at the same time, whether we all want to admit it or not, the world is changing at a pace that's so rapid that it's hard to keep up. And so one of the things that's great about the goal setting, in my opinion, is really writing down your goals so that you see what you were thinking at that point in time. We as humans have this revisionist history where we're like, oh, we knew this at the time because we know it now. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. You had no idea. And so a lot of the times that's something that we forget in terms of how we make decisions, is that the journey that you have along the way impacts you, right? So I obviously I'm a huge skier. I think about this as skiing all the time, right? It's like you're at the top of the mountain looking down and you're like, yo, this is a super gnarly run. I don't know if I can do this, right? And then you take a little bit down and then you're like, wait a second. Like, I can do this. Like, it's a lot easier, right? And so, each time you get a little bit further, you learn something. And so my whole view is that if you're going to do anything challenging in life, do it when you're young, right? Let that knowledge compound. Let that really allow you to grow and develop. And that really is manifested through being intentional and setting effective goals. And again, if you find that the goal should change, don't hesitate to change it. Like, for example, for 10 years, I had on my goals that I wanted to go to the gym. Okay. I don't think I have entered a gym in the last 10 years other than maybe to pick up a friend that was at the gym. I'm just not a gym guy. I just don't like it, right? And so for me, when I moved to the mountains was the first time I really started hitting my fitness goals, because I can go to the mountain. I live 5 minutes from the base. I could ski for an hour, come back and work. And for me, the mountain is my gym. And so one of the things that's really important is if my fitness goal was like, pump iron, or I don't even know what people do in a gym anymore. It's been so long since I've been there. But the reality is like, for me, I care a lot about taking care of my health. I care a lot about being physically fit. But for me, that isn't in the gym, right? And so that's just kind of one example of how adjusting your goal, you could still have the same idea, but as you grow and you learn, you have the ability to focus in a different way.
Yeah. I would, my son would say, he calls me country strong. So when he goes when I go to the gym with him, he's always like, I didn't think anybody could be as strong, because he doesn't think I'm that strong. But I was like, since I was 15 years old, I've been lifting weights. And so, it's like, over time, if you tracked it, I don't have I don't have to go back that far in data, but yeah, I've always just tracked my workouts. That way I can always see like where I'm at, right? And if I need to do something. And then the one that was interesting, because you talked about weekly goals, is that I set a goal last year. I wanted to get back to running more because I had run a bunch of marathons when I was in my 30s. And so I said, I'm going to run 1,000 miles this year. So I was like, and then what I did was I set a weekly and a monthly goal. And so I'm like 45 miles from my goal right now. So I got 2 weeks to run 45 miles. So if unless I blow
Get
out a
it,
knee, I'm
bro.
good.
Get it. Or
Yeah,
change the goal.
yeah. Oh yeah. I'm gonna make this goal. Unless I like blow out a knee or something, which hopefully won't happen. But it's great because I think that like you need to be flexible, and that's really the key to this whole thing. It's like,
And adaptable, I think, is the right word.
yeah.
It's not just flexible, it's adaptable. The world's going to change, and I'll give you one last example and then we'll move into the next topic. But, I remember when I left the corporate world and I told them that I was leaving to go do a trip around the world. Right. People are like, "Oh, are you crazy? You're giving up this money. You're doing all these things." And for me, on my goals, I had that I wanted to go on safari in Africa and explore the world, for many, many years. So something that seemed so crazy to everybody
Mhm.
else was actually a very intentional and calculated decision. And again, I'm super, super grateful I did that. And so again, only you can determine what's actually important to you, right? And that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to do goal setting, because it's hard to know what you want. It's hard to see, am I right? Am I wrong? Right? And the reality is you only learn by doing. Right. And so
Mhm.
if you're setting your goals, you're holding yourself accountable, and you're adapting to what the ever changing world is, that's all you can really hope for.
Yeah. And one thing you did bring up was the idea of like, you need to keep track of these things so you don't have survivor bias or like, like because something worked out, I must have had the right idea. And it's something I learned from another really great Canadian, a guy called Roger Martin. He talks about when you make a strategic bet, you write down, you make a prediction about what's going to happen. And so I started
Very important.
incorporating this. Yeah. And it's just super valuable because if not, you will work your way backwards to figure out, make your decision that you made seem like they were some kind of like omniscient, like you were the wizard controlling everything. When it was like probably a lot of luck, some skill, um, you know, some you just like right place at the right time sort of things. But so you'll understand that way you can hopefully make better decisions going forward. Um,
Amen, dude.
but but one thing because now we're getting close to the end here. The one thing I would ask you about, you was talking about when you left, and I think this is a good place to kind of sort of start wrapping this up because I think it sums up everything. You were talking about at the end or of your corporate career where people were like, "Going, Josh, you're leaving all this money behind. You're doing all this, you're doing all that." When we're talking to people in the business of fun and the entertainment business, right? Um, Sometimes we get trapped in this idea of the way everybody else is doing things. Well, this is what people are doing, right? This is what people were trying to trap you with. Often what people want me to do, right? Oh, Dave, why didn't you continue to work in like for a team or a league or something like that? Because I didn't want to. It wasn't what was going to work for me, right? Why did you go around the world? Because freaking going around the world and traveling in safari is amazing. How do you help people understand that like they have to see the world the way they see it and be confident enough to measure what's right for them, to make the decisions that are best for them? Because at the heart of the whole conversation is that there's a context to the decisions we make, and the context has to be specifically yours. A tool like Quantizr, strategy, all of these things we've talked about are there to help you see the world the way you can see it. Or am I wrong?
I mean, that's exactly it, right? And we can use Quantizr as an example to answer this question, because I think that's a really good one, right? When you think about it today, what's happening is when you're booking a live show, right? A promoter is sending the agent a offer. Okay. The agent is then taking that offer and manually inputting it into a system. Okay. They're then taking that they're generating a PDF and then sending that to the manager. The manager is then manually inputting all the data from that PDF in an Excel spreadsheet. Then they're taking another Excel spreadsheet, sending it to the business manager to be able to put it into another Excel spreadsheet, which is formatted completely differently, to be able to reconcile and do what they got to do. So when you think about it, the agent is spending 30% of their labor on manual data entry. The manager is spending another 30% of their labor on manual data entry. And the business manager is also spending another 30% of their time on manual data entry. So the question you ask yourself is that the best use of their time, right? Now, they can each answer that themselves, right? From an agent's perspective, there's a lot of other issues that come up, right? If it's so manual to be able to get data into the system, there's probably a lot of data that isn't actually inputted into the system that could be valuable if it's not going to be executed, right? We hear this all the time, right? With managers, right? There's one cell in their budget that has the wrong, formula, and it just manifests into all these issues, right? Business managers, the same thing, right? And so the question you ask yourself, right, as a human in 2025 is this really the best way that we can be doing business? Is this really our core business, right? So, for me, I always think about, in terms of how I build technology, is how can I go over the really obvious things that humans don't need to be doing? So again, when I go to an agent and I talk to them about, Quantizr, I can show them all the different ways that we can evaluate deals and structure deals and do all these different things. But at the core of the argument is your business really manually inputting data into a spreadsheet or a system? Do you want that to be your core business? No, obviously not, right? And so I think what's really important is that each individual person in 2025 needs to really think about what makes them unique, what's their competitive advantage, and how can they be better at whatever their core value proposition is. Now, is your core value proposition going to change over time because of technology? Yes. Yes, it is. But again, I think what's really, really important to think about is not just thinking about how things were done historically. Think about, for your business, what are the best ways that we can adapt to the ever-changing market, retain a competitive advantage so that we can continue to grow. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I hope every single person's goal that's working in the artist ecosystem is helping artists win. And for me, one of the things that I care a lot about is structure, right? I always try to think about, how do you structure things in the most effective way, right? So you said it really well. A lot of people have this revisionist history for themselves. They think, oh, I made this great decision and here's why, right? It's more important, especially as we look at 2026 and we're trying to think about what the year looks like. Call your shots. What do you want your company to look like in 2020, at the end of 2026? What do you want it to look like January 1st, 2027, right? And I think that when you really think forward looking and then work your way backwards in terms of setting your goals and thinking about how you get there, that's ultimately how you achieve success, in my opinion. And then again, constantly reevaluating. Nothing is static, right? Always reevaluating and finding new ways to do things. And at the essence, this is a form of creativity, right? This is human creativity. It's very hard. It's very challenging, but I think it's the core essence of what it is to be human.
Well, the thing is it's hard because it's worth it. Because if you were just mailing it in, it wouldn't be that valuable. And I think that's the importance of using AI, is it allows you to do that difficult, creative thing that makes a huge amount of difference better. And I think that, like, the big lesson here about helping, like, using tools, using ideas, creating a business that will help artists or teams or performances and operas and all these different things win. That's like the core of the business of fun. That's the core of what you're doing. And I think it's a really awesome message to leave people with at the end of this episode, since it'll be the first one that they hear in 2026. So thank you for that, Josh. How do people find you on the internet?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Joshua Litwack, CFA. And I'm also, if you'd like, you can also find me on Instagram. I'm JetSetterJosh, JET CETTERJOSH. And if you want to follow Quantizr, you can find us on socials at www.quantizr.com. That's QUANTIZR.com, no E. And you could also find us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, socials, all the fun stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks for doing this, Josh.
Thank you, man. Really appreciate the conversation and had a really great time, man. Looking forward to it.
Tell me what you thought of my conversation with Josh Litwack by sending me an email. It is my name, dave@davewakeman.com. Make sure you check out my website. It's davewakeman.com. Make sure you sign up for the Talking Tickets newsletter at talkingtickets.substack.com. Lots of new stuff coming in the new year. This conversation I wanted to make sure you listen to first, but get those newsletters so you don't miss a thing. As always, if you dug the episode, which if you're hearing this part of the message 50 or so minutes in, you definitely did, rate the podcast, share it, and review it. It helps the podcast grow, helps me keep getting great guests like Josh, and it encourages me to continue to deliver these things. We got a lot of great conversations coming up this month, so make sure that you're tuned in. And until next time, one more final Happy New Year, because I put the ultimatum on the first Monday of the new year. Happy New Year. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon. Take it easy.